you for all coming. I really appreciate everyone attending. There's a lot to cover and some quick housekeeping as well. Normally, when we used to do these SharePoint Saturday events, we'd have 75 minutes for this session. It then went down to 60 and now it's down to 50. So if you feel that I'm rushing through stuff, please just feel free to put your questions in the meeting notes in the message chat window over there, and I'll try to get to all of them together at the end of the Q&A session. I would like to answer them normally like I do as I go along, but to ensure that we cover everything, and there is a lot to cover, it would be great if we can take this approach just to streamline our time together today. Just a quick housekeeping item. Next week on the 5th, there is a webinar that I am leading and talking about on how to migrate SharePoint 2010 workflows to Power Automate. If you have a use case like that, the link that you're seeing now on your screen will allow you to register for the webinar and attend that session as well. Quick introduction about who I am. I am the VP of Technology for Office 365 and Azure at Cambay Consulting. My contact information is also shared out here. My phone number. Please don't subscribe me to robocalls. I'd appreciate that, as well as my Twitter handle is shared. A few of my publications regarding different topics are listed out there, and I've been basically doing SharePoint stuff for over 19 years. Let's quickly now get into what is governance. We're going to cover this relatively quickly because I'm assuming that people who are attending this call are aware of what governance is. Governance is a set of policies, roles, and responsibilities, as we all know, of how an organization's business divisions and IT teams work together to achieve its goals. That's a lot of words there. Essentially, you need different business units to know what their standard operating procedures are going to be when they interact with each other, and you need a set of policies and roles and responsibility designations to be defined to do that. Why do you need governance? Well, before we can answer that, the reality on the ground is that it can allow a seamless deployment of your Office 365 rollout and M365 rollout. You can actually map use cases from different business functions that you're trying to achieve to technology solutions. You can keep your organization's cloud system secure and compliant, and this is a big one. As we are all aware, there's a lot of data leakage. There's a situation around security. There are concerns as we roll out different technologies as organizations move from on-prem secure data centers to the cloud. Your content is going to get distributed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But security and compliance requires to have a good governance plan in place. And of course, the most important, because if you deploy a good change management, good governance plan in place, you will have an increased ROI by leveraging and consistent results and repeatable processes. Every organization that I've interacted with thinks that they can roll out governance in without really like, oh, I'll assign it to somebody as their side job, and they have their day job, and we can actually be successful. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. Governance team is extremely important when you're setting up any kind of a governance or building a governance plan when you're rolling out Office 365. So it's very important that you actually set up a team to manage governance, to manage the change that it's going to impact. Understand that Office 365 as a platform is a huge platform. It's a very high touch system. It's going to touch every aspect of your business if you're going to roll it out to your enterprise. And so it's important that you get a commitment and involvement from all the different roles that need to participate in making that governance plan implementable, as well as successfully rolling it out. And the next question is going to be asked, well, what kind of roles and responsibilities do I need as part of this team? I'm not going to go through all single one of these. The definitions are there. The stakeholders role is very important. The business division leaders is very important. The key message and takeaway is that from all the strategic people that are going to be involved in taking ownership of this governance plan that you're going to be putting together for Office 365 and SharePoint and Teams and all the different workloads, needs to have all these key stakeholders involved with a different RACI matrix definition of what they'll be doing as part of defining the governance plan, but they need to be involved to make it successfully adoptable, if that's a word. The other key thing I'll add over here is that in many smaller or mid-sized organizations, we might not have these boundaries defined by physical people. A person might be wearing multiple hats. That's okay, as long as they understand that they're covering all these roles when they're wearing these multiple hats. But it's important to have these very accurately and correctly defined. The other thing a lot of times people don't understand or not forget, there's like, oh, we're going to have a separate change management plan. Sure. As I've mentioned many times in many of my presentations before, that whenever you are deploying Office 365, it's gonna, I use this word momentous. It really is going to bring a significant impact on how your users perform their job function to get to the information that they need to perform their jobs and to interact with each other and so forth. Even as simple as exchanging of ideas, exchanging of information, like sharing content and so forth. So it's very important that you actually implement a process as part of your governance plan to manage that change, and also to define a change management policy in itself. If you don't do that, the adoption of the technology can suffer, but more importantly, it can also impact user productivity and the overall user experience and the whole user interfacing with the platform. So it's important to put a change management plan in place. For each of the different workloads in Office 365, it's important to understand what each of these services will provide and what your SLAs are going to be for each of those. It's important to understand that now you are going, as you are migrating and setting up Office 365 and M365 in the cloud, you are going away from the classic data stores. You might exist in a hybrid mode for a few years or a few quarters or a few months, but you're going to be bound by the SLAs that your service level agreement with Microsoft dictates. So if Office 365, for example, supports a certain uptime, you can't promise an RPO or an RTO greater than that. And most importantly, you have to prevent the proliferation of unmanaged content and services. So if you're rolling out a service, you want to make sure that you put boundary controls, boundary and guardrails around it in such a manner, leveraging the capabilities of the Microsoft Admin Center in Governance Admin Center, in such a manner that those services are not being misused. An example of this could be that if you set up OneDrive for internal collaboration, then it should not be able, users should not be able to collaborate, exchange content on that OneDrive with external users. I'm just saying that it's a tactical example to crystallize the idea. The other key thing is that in how will you achieve all of these? Well, the first thing is you have to formulate, as I mentioned, a governance team, a governance group that will help you define this, what each of these services is going to offer. Then you have to develop the policies associated with those, aligning those with your compliance department, with your legal department, making sure that not your data security requirements are met, your all those requirements from different stakeholders are met. And then you actually define the policies and you communicate those policies effectively with your users. And then, of course, you want to encourage the users to use that so that people don't necessarily not suddenly have tools available to use. I'll give a simple example. We're at a client situation, rolling out Office 365. We thought a lot about securing content, providing a very robust solution around creating retention labels and things and applying them to pieces of content, especially when they're going to be shared externally, either from SharePoint or Teams or individual users' OneDrives. And the result of that was that those retention labels were so restrictive that people actually downloaded Box and started collaborating on that with external vendors. That's what my point is, that you have to prevent rogue installations and you have to make sure that those installations don't forte into the domain space of the tool that you're rolling out things at the enterprise level. I'll talk a little bit about this because this is important. The entire approach around governing content and governing the platform has significantly changed as and when the organizations have moved into the cloud. The old approach, and I'll cover that, it's important to briefly understand. If you recall, one of the oldest ways when SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013 on-prem used to be around, and they still are in many organizations, you would have a very tightly knit control from the top down. You'd have a company portal, you'll have divisional portals, you'll have team sites and group sites, you'll have more project sites and your own individual My sites. And then as you were going down the pyramid, people would be allowed to do things or not allowed to do certain things. And what that resulted in was, okay, it used to suffice for basic things, but what it did was it didn't allow for dynamic content. It didn't allow for innovation. It didn't allow for just-in-time collaboration and things like that. Because people were always afraid that if they put something out there that was not properly vetted, it hadn't been thought through by the communication department, they were going to essentially have certain quality issues, leakage issues, and so forth. Well, now we can work around that with the tools that are available to us in Office 365. But before I go into how to configure what to do in order to meet that, the idea is that you're actually focused more on defining governance based upon the tool that you're using and configuring it in such a manner that it's meeting the appropriate needs for the use case that it is being used for. And there's a lot of automation that is possible, and so you can allow people to use different components of the tool for giving them the free will and the free capacity to do the innovation, but also to adhere to and follow the corporate policies and so forth. What do I mean by that? Let me translate that into a very tactical example. you can actually configure the governance module in Office 365. I keep calling it Office because Microsoft keeps changing the names. It's M365 now. In M365 to configure it using regular expressions, for example, so that PII data cannot ever be published without certain rules being met. And if somebody puts a credit card information or puts a credit card form online, corrective action can be taken. Well, in the old days, we would dictate this, that every time somebody uploaded it, the system would quarantine that document, and suddenly that information would disappear from the portal and the search index and so forth. And then the notification would go to the admin, and he or she would reach out to the user and say, you did a boo-boo, or hey, is there a reason you're posting this, and so forth, and you need this, share this information. Well, now, for example, let's say I'm chatting with my best buddy and I tell him, hey, we need to procure this piece of software for purchasing some tool that I need, some software that I need to do my job. And he goes, okay, what's the corporate credit card number? He types it into MS Teams chat, and lo and behold, you suddenly actually have information that is PII related that is being shared over that channel. Well, no, if you actually have configured it properly, immediately the system will detect it, quarantine it, send a notification, let the end user know that they're not supposed to do that, and take corrective action. Or it can be configured to say, hey, are you really sure you want to do this? It's against the policy. Are you really cognizant of this fact? So the tool has a lot of automation capability available in it. It's really powerful. And all I'm going to say, it spans across the entire spectrum of the workloads in Office 365 to provide each and every tool to be configured in a proper manner so that it can deliver that capability. And how to do it is not the scope of our discussion today. I'm just using examples as we're going along to crystallize the ideas that I'm talking about. These are some, not all, the different services that I'm going to cover in today's discussion. And some of these are updated, some of these are older, but it's important to actually cover them to understand what is it that you have to govern when you roll out Office 365. The first thing I'm going to touch is the big one from Microsoft, is Microsoft Teams. I think after Exchange, back about 20-25 years ago, when it was the new mail server technology, that I'm aging myself. That's how long ago I was at Microsoft. No one has had this type of reaction in the market space around, and Microsoft itself has not had this kind of reaction on a product creating that kind of buzz as it has in the market space of all the different things that it can be utilized for. What is it? I get asked all the time. Is it a chat utility? Is it a phone PTSN system? Is it a collaboration tool? Is it going to replace my phone system? What is Teams? In fact, we're running this webinar or this presentation off of Teams. So there's a whole slew of legacy applications that were distinct siloed applications that sort of built a wrapper around and is replacing. It's got an underlying technology of SharePoint. It's got underlying technology of different old Microsoft tools, which have been completely redone. The chat utility is unbelievably awesome. The conference calling capabilities that we're leveraging right now are completely redone, and the old Skype for Business stuff is all gone. And it built, when I say that it's a combination of services, these were the old legacy services that now that when you move to the cloud are being wrapped up into one. And so you have to configure different rules-based engine technology in the governance module to deliver capability for each of those distinct use cases. So you have to understand what the boundaries and limitations are going to be around each of those capabilities. He or she is allowed to chat, but he or she might not be allowed to upload a document in chat. They want to do it, they need to go do it somewhere else. All these kinds of management controls are available to you now. And you also have to understand the extensibility of Teams. This comes from all the connectors that Microsoft provides, all the tools that can be embedded in Teams. You can have a Jira view into Teams, for example, if you have that. It's a huge, huge tool set. And so it has impact, therefore, on your organization. Therefore, it needs a lot of thought needs to be put into defining what those key integration points are going to be, and also making sure that you adequately plan for each of those integration points as they're going to be consumed within your enterprise to be properly controlled and defined. Again, when I say proper and controlled and defined, I don't mean restricted so much nobody can use it, but understand study it, understand it, and know that you have to configure all of these options as integration points within Teams. I don't have the capacity to go into every single one. There's so many, but the idea is to give you guys during this discussion the framework that you need to create around when you're defining a governance plan. Let's quickly cover SharePoint Online. Of course, who does not know SharePoint Online? SharePoint Online is supposed to solve all our problems, including world hunger. Again, a lighthearted joke on the matter. But as organizations move to the cloud, the legacy versions of SharePoint are either going to be retired or they're going to cohabit with SharePoint Online in a hybrid format. When you roll out SharePoint Online, you have a huge amount jump from the previous versions of SharePoint. I'll give you a simple example: file size limitation, list limitation, constant and consistent updates from Microsoft on the number of web parts that are available, the number of improvements around the entire spectrum of what users can actually do, having mega menus that can actually be target audience, and things like where SharePoint sites used to take months to develop can be the classic sites. Now in modern sites, you can actually customize the look and feel, apply a theme, and relatively roll it out in a few hours versus or even a few minutes, actually, if you know what you're doing, versus getting a developer to skin the site the way you want and embed some tools to make it look pretty. The cool thing is that all of that is now capable. The capability of the tool is available to you out of the box to do a lot of these things. So again, you have to know the boundaries and limitations of what you can and cannot do. Sure, Microsoft has advertised that you can put 1 million items in a list, but should you be doing that? The question is that the smartest design pattern that you can come up with as an IT pro to allow your users to put 1 million items in a list? One of the key things around managing the old days of SharePoint, most companies used to turn off site provisioning. Well, that used to lead to lack of collaboration. Think about putting a site provisioning wizard in place so that people can actually provision sites and request things like sites or teams, so that you can actually have a managed control process around the full life cycle of a SharePoint site and or a MS team, for that matter. A site classification is very important. You have to have the ability to classify your sites so that you can actually restrict or allow certain use and behavior in those sites. If you tag something as private, for example, that site collection, for example, in SharePoint Online could be restricted where external guests are not invited. I'm just giving you tactical examples as we're going in all of these. You have to create site policies. What is going to be, how long is this content going to reside? Am I legally responsible for keeping the content around for longer than 7 years? If it's a tax site, for example, or something. And then from an admin perspective, I've just put one bullet there, but there are many more that you actually have to think about. How are you going to, what is your naming convention going to be? How are you going to create the sites? Are you going to allow for a hierarchical structure? Or are you going to go relatively flat the way Microsoft is recommending it? Again, these are organizational level decisions that you have to make when you actually create a governance plan. I'm going to cover this briefly because no organization at the enterprise level, or for that matter, at a medium to a small size business level can, just cut over to SharePoint Online. The organizations have made investments in their on-prem versions of SharePoint, where thousands and thousands of people hours. People need to, it takes time to do these migrations, and therefore, at least for the medium or short term, you end up with multiple environments. And one of the approaches that Microsoft shared a few years back, as early as I think 2015, 2016 timeframe, was the ability to allow you to set up a hybrid SharePoint environment. And what that does is allows you to have a on-prem version of SharePoint talk to the online version. This is only supported as far back as 2013 now. 2010, you couldn't do it. I mean, I'm sure you could a long time ago, but it's not supported. So you have to be on 2013 and higher for this to work. And a lot of companies want to retain this model because of data compliance needs, for other particular needs, especially around audit and government controls and things like that. If you are going to deploy SharePoint in a hybrid mode, there are certain considerations that you need to be aware of. You need to be aware of, especially around OneDrive for Business. You might actually have a SharePoint on-prem location, but you want to disable OneDrive for Business and enable it in the cloud for personal storage, so people have that along with them wherever they go. Just an example. You might, if people are following sites in one location, it does not translate necessarily to the other location if they're in that other site. You have to figure out a solution for that. Profiles in Dell. If you're in one location, you have to redirect the user to search for another user to the cloud. So if you build it properly, you're going to actually have a person click on a user's name on the on-prem version, and if the system's been built and governed properly and defined properly, it should redirect them to the correct location in the online version. The app launcher, search, and auditing, these are all great things that you have to solve for. You have to, do you put your search index in the cloud as a single index, indexing both your content stores, or do you keep those two separate? In the old days, you used to keep them separate. As we move in more and more towards the cloud, the idea is to put it in the cloud so you don't have to invest in a heavy search infrastructure on-prem. But you might then be out of compliance if you do that, if your data for a particular site collection can never leave the on-prem version. Again, considerations on things that we have to do. Managed metadata is another example. If you actually create managed metadata online and you want it to be inherited to the on-prem pieces of content and those same tags to be available, you have to have the managed metadata service be consumed by the on-prem version from the online version. So your service applications that govern all of this stuff, user profiles, user syncing, managed metadata, are big considerations to think about and how you're going to manage those. How are these relevant to governance? Well, first you have to define what each service is going to again use, utilize, and provide, and also then allow users therefore to to be able to consume those services effectively in each of the tools. I briefly covered OneDrive for Business. I'm not going to spend too much time in this, but there are some considerations when you're launching OneDrive for Business. Define what your boundary conditions and limitations are going to be. SharePoint Online at Ignite recently announced, actually the SharePoint team announced that they're going to allow 100 gig file size to be stored in SharePoint. I've never tested it. I don't even have a 100 gig file. But if you don't define your boundary conditions, it could have a network contention issue. It could have resource contention issues and impact your tenant viability issues as well. The other key pieces around user management. Your user identity as a single identity is going to be now managed in the cloud. How does that impact your administration or capabilities and so forth to see and be aware of what those users are doing in the cloud? Is somebody using their OneDrive for Business or personal use? If you need to monitor those capabilities, those need to be defined in the governance plan as a requirement and then net translated into the governance module from an implementation perspective. External sharing. This is a huge one. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, this is one of the biggest wins of going from an on-prem to an online version of SharePoint. At the same time, it is one of the most dangerous things that can happen from a governance perspective by going online. Because now your users, if you have not set up your policies correctly, can potentially share files with any external user. It's a huge tool. But if you actually set up your conditional access and policies correctly, you can control which organizations with whom you can share information, what the process is for your users to share information with certain organizations, or not to allow unlimited, unhindered access. However, both approaches have mitigating. You can shut everything down. You can leave everything open. The middle ground is somewhere where you need to be, where you need to allow for collaboration, but then you need to put some processes in place so an organization with whom your users want to interact it with for collaboration externally can be registered, for example, with your company, and then the governance module can be configured to allow those organizations to come in and collaborate with your users. Giving examples around these tactical things to make this more of a realistic scenario that you people might run into when you are doing when you're configuring and requirements and so forth. Sync and quotas are very important. Yes, everybody gets a terabyte of storage or even more or unlimited. So just gave an example, but how are you actually going to set up those quotas? Are you really going to allow it? Are people going to start doing shredded storage is now available where only Delta files are pushed out, number one, and then all the cloud files are stored in Office 365, and unless you actually double click on the file, it doesn't download to your machine. Do you allow people to actually change that setting or not? Very simple examples, but things to consider. Microsoft Stream. I'm not going to cover what it does. I think everybody is aware of what it does. It's the new recording capability tool from Microsoft, fully integrated with Teams. In fact, this meeting is being recorded using Stream technology, and it will be available post this meeting via a link to be shared by the administrators of this meeting. The interesting thing is that this has a huge impact on your network and has a huge impact on your storage capacity within your tenant. All the meetings that you record do get counted against your quota. If you are a large organization and every person is recording every meeting and putting it in Stream, well, think about that. The other key fact is that it has an impact if people start downloading these huge files and then saving them and then uploading them into SharePoint or into, and why I say SharePoint and not Teams, because when people upload it to Teams, they're in fact uploading it to the underlying SharePoint site underneath that team. And so there is a storage impact to that. if your SharePoint farm suddenly grows from, hey, I was using 100 gigs of on-prem and now suddenly I have 2 terabytes of storage. Think about what's happening to your stream videos and audio files and so forth. There are management controls around it and another thing. At Ignite, another important announcement came, which was around external sharing of stream video and audio. This was not possible. This is now being released. It is already past preview and it is going to be available in most tenants by the end of the year. That's another big announcement from Microsoft Stream. From a governance perspective, again, you have to put boundary conditions and limitations around what your users can do with this technology. I'll cover Office 365 groups next. It's a very, very important topic, even though we don't talk about it. The scope of this discussion is not to talk about a fully integrated Azure Active Directory group structure, but to cover what Office 365 groups does and what it should be used to manage in the cloud from a governance perspective. One, it is a subscription-based service to allow user access to different services, role-based access to different pieces of content, and so forth. The key thing around here is that you have to have some usage guidelines around who can create and manage these groups. Things like data classification and so forth will allow certain people to perform certain actions when they belong to certain groups and restrict other people from doing things like that. You can apply retention policies and labels and guest access. All of those things can be managed through Office 365 groups. Again, not in the scope of what we're going to do, but it is essential to create a policy around Office 365 groups to manage these things. I know I have 12 minutes left, so I am rushing through a lot of this information, but I'll try to cover as much as I can. Planner is a huge tool. Again, a basic tool that is available for task management. You need to cover, at least if you're going to leverage a project management capability in Office 365, you need to create a governance tool set around that. Same thing with threaded conversations in Yammer. Yammer is a very powerful, very essential chat-based utility that is being utilized throughout the Office 365 ecosystem. It has an impact to SharePoint. It has huge integration points with Office 365. There are collaborations that take place in threaded conversations with people often sharing files and working on them in a dynamic manner. You need to monitor that content. You need to make sure that it adheres to your governance rules and so forth. So you need to look at all the configurations that you're going to need to do to your Yammer service and then provide that capability again to your end users. I'm not going to spend too much time on Dell, but it is essentially our AI from Microsoft. It is delivering huge capabilities around machine learning and so forth to end users and making the system more intelligent as it evolves. You have to if you don't put a governance plan around how that information can be shared, what information needs to be serviced, you are setting yourself up for failure because you might potentially have people receiving information. It implements role-based security. That's not what I'm talking about. You have to control what content from which tools need to be surfaced up or not. You want to control based upon the user's role of what needs to be shown up from what. So this is important, another tool set to remember. I'm not going to spend, I wish I had more time, but it is a huge tool, Power Apps and Microsoft Power Automate, Power BI. Again, these are extremely powerful tools. You can actually create a Canvas app in SharePoint by creating SharePoint Canvas app forms, applying them to a SharePoint list, and creating a Power Automate workflow to execute business process automation for you. You have to allow for who can do what on this. You have to control this environment so end users are not going around willy-nilly creating apps on their SharePoint sites and deploying them and inviting people to utilize them. The connections that are used are regulated. You also have the ability to connect to third-party systems. If you're going to allow for those capabilities, you're going to allow for those tools to be utilized, you're going to end up in an environment where which is really powerful, which is what you want. You want all of this stuff, but then you have to create those boundary conditions and limitations around them. I just covered automate in the same sentence, so I'm going to skip this. This is the part that I was trying to get to. And I have 9 minutes left. As I said, normally this is an hour, 15-minute presentation. I'm down to by 25 minutes on that. These are all the different tools that are available today at a very high level that I'm not going into the in depth on all the different considerations that you have, the capabilities of Office 365 and M365 to let you build this governance plan. The key thing here is I'm not naming the tools. I'm not naming the technologies underlaying this, but I'm saying the capability that is available. The key thing to take away from this is that you have a tool for data loss prevention. You have a rights management tool and an IRM tool. You have a retention tool available. With Azure Information Protection, AIP, you can actually classify data, you can segment it, you can apply retention labels and control all of that information. Device management can be handled through EMS with what used to be Intune and now is called Endpoint. You have Microsoft, ATP, Advanced Threat Threat Protection and Advanced Threat Analytics to allow you to analyze what is happening within your tenant. And of course, auditing and eDiscovery are available. These are some of examples of pre-built custom policies to protect your sensitive data. You can apply these policies on your set of data and classify it and so forth. And this is just a very small subset. There are more than 200 or so of these already documented on the tenant. Important to understand that you don't have to create things from scratch. You can inherit from these, you can remove things, you can add things to these things. Some custom actions. What happens when you apply a piece of policy to a piece of content? Should you apply it based on a specific piece of content, and what actions need to be taken? Should users have the ability to override it, or should only certain people with certain roles and responsibilities override it? Again, all of these things need to be part and parcel of your governance plan. Rights management allows what users can and cannot do with documents. You don't want a piece of document ever leaving your internal domain. Well, you can apply those rules and set it up in a certain manner so it can do that. Again, things that you have to collect the requirements, document them, and then create a governance plan around it, especially around retention. A lot of things in the old days was in SharePoint would be like, I don't want this document around after 7 years. I want you to automatically delete it. There needs to be no discussion. Well, that's great. We used to have all of those, and documents used to go through that. And now what Microsoft has released at a very high level is a preserve policy. So you apply a preserve policy on a piece of document. It can be applied at the level of site collection, labels, pieces of content, specific period of time, and you can actually, it is based on that and can be will be held to account for that. So if a document, even if somebody tries to delete a piece of document during that time, they will not be able to successfully do that. It moves that piece of content out of there into a secure location, sends out a notification to the administrator, and covers that. Not going to go into all of the device management pieces. Again, something that you need to understand: conditional access, ability to remotely wipe down the devices, the ability to actually require that all devices that are connecting to your pieces of content have end-to-end encryption enabled on them. Again, there are tools within the EMS suite that allow you to do this. And you can, I've just given a screenshot of how you actually create a policy and you have apply it to all these things. Also, the cloud app security broker technology is now there, out of scope from my current discussion, but look into it if you need a single sign-on solution that can authenticate and broker policies across different workloads. Quickly talking about the auditing overview. One thing I can say this is that almost everything that you do in Office 365, if it has been set up properly, can be fully audited. You can scope it to a user, you can scope it to a URL, you can scope it to anything. Every action that an end user takes, an administrator takes, or for that matter, any system action as well, is fully auditable and can be reported upon. At least for 90 days, it's out of the box. That's the way it's configured. You can increase that to unlimited. You can increase it to whatever, but that depends upon your auditing requirements. You need to actually create a policy around this. If you are ever held to account on who did what, somebody deleted something, or for that matter, if you are bound by legal conditions and compliance conditions to provide auditing of all content and things like that in governmental organizations, this is a great feature to utilize. Last but not least, the capability in Office 365 and M365 across all its platforms to easily provide an eDiscovery solution so that legal requirements can be met. You can now apply legal holds for sites, mailboxes, all the way down to pieces of content that might be stored. You can assign permissions to a case so people can review it once, or people can contribute to it, people can read it, and so forth. You can add alerts so that if somebody does something to a piece of this content that is under the eDiscovery tag, it actually allows the administrator to be informed about it, and then requisite action can be taken. For meeting government requirements that you have met for auditing purposes, all eDiscovery requirements, you can export the results and share it across outside your organization. I have rushed through everything. I am at 1:48 according to my clock on the Pacific Coast. I guess if my moderator can come online and tell me if there were any questions that were asked during the session, we'll take the last minute and a half available to us to try to answer them.
Yeah, a lot of good information. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?